Mountains are still being moved, and strongholds are still being loosed. God, we believe it, and yes, we can see it, and wonders are still what you do. And bodies are still being raised. Giants are still being slain. God, we believe it, and yes, we can see it, and wonders are still what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you... Is that your prayer this morning? Say it. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do. 'Cause we need a move. Can you say that this morning? We need a move. We need a move. Lord, we need a move. We need a move. Bodies are still being raised. Giants are still being slain. God, we believe it. And yes, we can see it. The wonders are still what you do. You do, Lord. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Yeah, come and do what you do. 'Cause we need a move. We need a move. Lord, we need a move. Move in this place. We need a move. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen. You need a miracle today? Heaven is coming. Yes. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. Miracles, miracles happen when you move. God, healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. This is a move. Oh, this is a move. Oh, this is a move. This is a move. This is a move. One more time. This is a move. Oh, this is a move. A move of God. This is a move. This is a move. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word. Listen to these words this morning. Just to rest upon His promise, just to know thus saith the Lord. Come on, let it ring. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I prove Him. Hallelujah. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus. Oh, for grace to trust Him more. Sing it again. Jesus, 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 how I trust Him, how I, oh Lord, we've proved You are Lord. Yes, Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus. Oh, for grace to trust Him more. We are here for You. Come and do what You do. We are here for You. Come and do what You do. Set our hearts on You. Come and do what You do. 'Cause we need a move. We need a move. We need a move. We need a move. We are here. We are here for You. Come and do what You do. We are here for You. Come and do what You do. Set our hearts on You. Come and do what You do. 'Cause we need a move. Lord, we need a move. Can you say that this morning? We need a move.
In John chapter 5, we see a story of Jesus going to a feast. And what's amazing about this feast is anywhere that Jesus goes, he goes with a purpose. How many of you know that Jesus didn't go anywhere without having a purpose? And he's on his way to a feast. Now, what feast was it? We're not exactly sure, but if you do a lot of study in theology and you go to find out the seasons that they were, you would find out that it's probably during the Feast of Tabernacles, which was celebrated where the presence of the Lord was. Now, we're not 100% certain about that, but that's where this probably he was headed. And notice something. While he was on the way to this feast, Jesus begins to have an encounter. Oh, well, let me stop this morning and let you know that anywhere that Jesus goes, he went with a purpose, and that encounter was very specific. And can I tell you this morning, he's come by this morning to have an encounter with you if you would only listen for his voice. I know there's a bunch of us here this morning that wonder, is he still there? But Jesus is stopping by to share something with us. Now look at the Bible in John chapter 5, verse number 1, and it says, and there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roof colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, lame, and paralyzed, and one man who had been an invalid for 38 years. Let me just stop right there and tell you what this means. For 38 years, he had not been able to do the things that normal people do. Now, you can dig a little bit deeper into this study and find out that this man probably was paralyzed and probably had a lot of other issues, but chances are, for whatever reason, for the last 38 years of his life, we don't know if he was born this way, we don't know if it happened after he was born, but for 38 years, he had not been able to function properly. And for somebody that said, I'm just waiting on Jesus to show up, know that this man for 38 years was waiting on Jesus to show up. I've stopped by to let somebody know that no matter how long it's been, Jesus could stop by at any moment. Oh, that's not even part of it this morning. But just let me know he could stop by this morning in your moment, in your need, in your situation, and he can do everything that he needs to do. Look at verse number 6. It says, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he asked him a question, do you want to be healed? I want to stop right there. Because as I read this for the first 5 or 6 times that I've ever read this, I always was like, man, Jesus, you were asking a pretty crazy question. But let me just let you know something about Jesus. Jesus always talked and asked and walked in ways that always had a point. And here Jesus was asking the man something much deeper than surface level. Now let me just talk about surface level stuff. Anybody ever sent a text message that you sent through text and you knew that by the time it got to the other side that it wasn't going to be received the same way? None of you have ever made that mistake. Like, you've never sent a text message you wish you could pull back. What about an email that you sent off? You put anybody ever seen it to where you typed it out, then you deleted it, and then you typed it out, then you deleted it again, then you typed it out, and then finally sent it, and then when you sent it, you wish you could pull it back? Gmail now has a little feature that you can pull messages back after 30 seconds, but after that, it's over. How many of you know that there are times in our lives that we want that 45-second pullback? Amen? We want that back to where we can pull it back. But Jesus said this for a reason. He wasn't just saying it because he was trying to get people to notice him. Jesus was saying it because, watch this, Jesus always knows things that we don't know. Somebody needs to grab that this morning. Jesus knows things that we don't know, which means what? He knows the outcome of situations and seasons in your life right now that you don't even think you're going to make it through. But Jesus knows things that we can't even begin to imagine. And as I begin to think about this, Jesus is always walking by and he's telling something. Here's the sermon title this morning to everybody that needs it. It's the Red Letter Series Part 2, but here we go. The sermon title is, I'm tired, but I'm not going to give up. Somebody this morning needs to hear this. You're tired, you're exhausted, you don't know if you can make it another day, but you're not going to give up. Why? Because you have someone in your corner that is greater than what you can even imagine. You have somebody that is fighting for you. You have somebody that is with you and in your battles with you. And I tell you what, as a pastor over the last few weeks and months, I would stand up here honestly and expose myself for a moment and say, I'm tired. I don't get it. Anybody ever woke up in the last couple of months and just say, God, I don't understand it. Where are you? Have you been there? I don't understand why it's like this. I don't understand. Look, y'all, there is nothing right about walking into a church service having to wear masks. Amen. But here's what I do know. While we don't understand it, we serve a God that already knows why and when and how this is going to end. Why? Because he can just say it's going to end today and it ends today. But if it doesn't, even though I'm tired, even though I'm exhausted, even though I feel like giving up at times, I know I have Jesus in my corner, so I'm not going to give up and I'm not going to quit. This man had been at this pool now for a few years. Now, I went on the internet and I found, here's one of the things that's really cool. You can find, archaeologists have found places just like this in the Bible, and they can prove that it existed. And I've got a picture for you here about this particular colonnade. This is where they believe that this took place. This particular picture is one that they think this was probably the pool that John was talking about in this particular instance. So if you can put that picture up there. So what you see here, this is there, and you can notice that and probably in former times there would have been different levels, different colonnades, so to speak, to where there would have been a top on there, and people would have crowded in there. And at the very bottom of this pool, you may not be able to see it. You can go Google image this, the pool at Bethesda, and this will be some pictures that they pull up. But at the very bottom of it would have been a small wading pool for people to get in. And what the Bible says is that when the waters were stirred, people that got to the waters would be healed. And so notice this isn't just a little pool and out with all kinds of nice flowers and palm trees and things like that, but people would have been crowded into this space. Sick people that were desperate, searching for answers, they would have been crowded into this small place, and Jesus goes here on purpose. Notice there would have been hundreds of people sick of some kind of sickness, and Jesus didn't just go there for the crowds, but Jesus went there for the one. Jesus is always in search of the one. He's always going after the one that everybody seems to forget. He's always going after the one that nobody thinks is going to make it. Why? Because that's what Jesus came for. Jesus came so that the one might know life and he might have it to the fullest. And I've stopped by this morning to let you know, no matter your circumstance, Jesus is coming after you. Oh, he's coming after me. Somebody needs to say, I'm not giving up. One author writes it this way. He wrote this. We often judge ourselves by our intentions, while we judge other people by their actions. I really wanted to pray this morning, but because I had so much going on, God, you'll have to forgive me but they didn't even think about praying, Lord. Now let me just think, how many of you have ever judged somebody else by their actions and yourself by your intentions? Don't wave at me or wave your hand or point to your neighbor or point to your husband or wife. But here's the thing, we've all done this. We've all judged others by what they've done, and we've judged ourselves by our intentions. And I began to think about this. How many people around this particular pool had judged that poor man by what he did not do and judged themselves by their intentions? How many people were looking at this man going, if you just had enough faith, you would get up and get in that pool? But does anybody remember what it said? It said this man was an invalid, which means basically he probably couldn't get there on his own. And so somebody, chances are, had to take him down to where he was at least close enough to be in the vicinity of the pool. Had it not happened, then guess what? He wouldn't have made it down there. But as I began to think about this, the more I realized is this man had to be tired. Why do you know that? For 38 years, this man had been waiting on a healing to come, and yet nothing had happened. Can you imagine 38 years, all the resources he must have spent trying to get people to help him, and everybody would have stopped by with the quick help method? Anybody know that there's always somebody listening? Last night, as a matter of fact, we were sitting talking in our bedroom, and my wife was talking about closets. Now, I don't know why she was talking about closets, but she was. And she said, we need to put some drawers in our closet, to which I said, okay, why do we need more drawers in our closet? And then about that time, she's scrolling through Facebook, and all of a sudden, she now sees some drawers in closets on the Facebook ad. Facebook is always listening. And if it's listening to me right now, let me just say that God is always listening. He's still listening to every one of our conversations. Look, somebody says, I don't understand why people are listening. Well, there's always been somebody listening. You just didn't think about it. There's always somebody around. You just didn't think about it. And think about this man. He had been so tired and he had been so exhausted of trying everything that somebody said. Somebody'd walk in and said, hey, if you'll just get a little bit closer when the water stirs, all you'll have to do is dip your hand in there. And so he got a little bit closer. It didn't work. Somebody pushed him out of the way and he couldn't get into the pool. And for years after years, everybody comes by. Hey, I've got this idea you can try. He bought into it. I don't know if he had a lot of money. Chances are he probably didn't. And he would have been buying into everything that people would have offered. Now, let me ask you this. How many of you have ever bought into something thinking it's going to work for you? Oh, let's talk about diets for a minute. I want to go there just for a moment because I know everybody buys into these diet things. And you get into them and you're like, I'm going to do this diet. South Beach, North Beach, West Beach, East Beach, West, all the diets that's out there, the beach diets. I don't know if they work. I don't even like the beach. But here's what I do know. There's always something that works for somebody, but it always doesn't work for me. I mean, how many of you have ever been enrolled in a gym? I'll just leave it at that. I've been enrolled in many gyms in my life. I've probably visited 3 or 4 over the course of my life at a time. That's about it. I haven't been in there. I don't live there. But they get you when they say, hey, if you enroll in this gym, it's going to bring good health to you. The problem is they don't tell you that you have to go to the gym in order to get good health. I gave him my money, but it didn't work. This man had been given everything, and he had tried everything, and nothing had worked, so he's gotten tired. Maybe like some of you this morning. You've been after Jesus. You've been trying to draw close to Jesus. You've been following after Jesus. And all of this time, you've not been able to get to where you are. And you're just tired and you're frustrated and you're exhausted with what Jesus could do for you. And yet he doesn't. But as I began to think about this, I realized the pool was a place that people who were out of options began to go. I mean, in other words, they had tried everything else, so they were going to go sit around this pool. And can you imagine all the sick people that were all fighting for the same spot in the pool? Now, I don't know about you, but what if there was a pool today, in today's world, and the only people that could get well were those that were sitting close enough to when the water stirred? Can you imagine the fights of people that would try to get in that pool first? Can you imagine people forgetting about what they said they would do? Anybody ever had a friend that said they would do something for you until the day that you actually need them, and then you called them all day and you couldn't get a hold of them? I don't have friends like that. I've got friends that drive 3 hours to sit in the front row with me. But here's what I can tell you. Anybody ever been let down by friends? And when push comes to shove, they're more worried about themselves than you. And that's exactly what was happening around this pool until Jesus stopped by. Oh, let me tell you somebody this morning that Jesus is stopping by at your weakest moment. Jesus is stopping by when you cannot believe that you're going to make it another day. And I begin to think a little bit more about this. All you need to know is that Jesus was pushing people aside just so he could go and see one person. See, Jesus always cared about the one. Can you imagine? If you were to walk through that place and you started at the top, and as Jesus began to walk down, and again, we think this was it, but if it looked anything like that, Jesus would have had to weave his way down through a bunch of other people. And if you can imagine anything about that, it would be hard probably for Jesus to walk around all of these sick people. And most of you might say, just like I have, well, I wonder why Jesus didn't walk by and just touch everybody, because Jesus had the power to walk in and touch everybody, and they could have all walked home, right? But Jesus was on a mission for the one that was tired and exhausted. He said, look, there's one person here that if I was to change them, it's going to give everybody else hope. And maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you walked in here this morning tired and exhausted and worn out. Maybe you've had prayer after prayer after prayer, and it just went silent. This man had given up on everything. He had given up on his friends. He had given up on his family. He had given up on the people that said that they were going to get him in the water. But there was somebody coming that was greater than everything around him. And this man was about to encounter a life change. Now this morning, as I begin to look a little bit further into the Word, whatever I found about Jesus is, watch this. Jesus was not looking to do something difficult. Jesus was looking to do something impossible. Oh, I've got to say that again. Because it would have been difficult for Jesus just to heal some people that had a cold. Anybody ever prayed for a cold? And said, Lord, you just got to take this cold away, and you've got to help me stop coughing. And Jesus is like, really? That's what you want me to do? But Jesus thinks about this for a moment, and Jesus probably surveyed the crowd that day as he walked down, and he's walking down through all of these people, and he's imagining one thing: what will my Father get the most glory out of, and what will people see the power that my Father has? And he sees this one man, and his eyes get fixed on this one man, and he walks him all the way around everyone that was needy to this one man who for 38 years had prayed the same prayers, who had prayed, that said the same things. He had given up probably even on God if he believed in him at that point. Just like some of you today. Some of you today may say, God, I've been praying for so long, and yet you've been so silent, and you've probably given up. But guess what? Jesus may be on his way by to let you know that he's still in the miracle business. He's still in the impossible business. He's not in the business of doing what's just difficult, but God's in the business of doing what's impossible. When you think all hope is God, Jesus says, I'm on my way down just to grab a hold of you and tell you to do something great. Now, before I tell you what he's going to do, we've got to get back to the story. Look at verse number 7. It says, the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me. And Jesus said to him, notice he says something that is crazy. He doesn't even just say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stir the water and I'm going to help you in it. No, but Jesus goes beyond what was difficult, and he does the impossible. Watch, here's what he does. He says, Sir, get up, take up your mat, and walk. I'm going to let you think on that just for a minute. A man who had not been able to move on his own for 38 years. Anybody ever been down on your back just for a little while? That's basically me every time I get out of bed now in the morning. And it hurts to get up. And you walk a little bit different. You walk a little bit funny after a while. And after you've been laying for a long period of time, you just don't get up. You know what I'm saying. You've got to stretch a little bit. This man, for 38 years, had probably never taken a step on his own, had not been able to control his limbs, had not been able to control his movement. Therefore, that's why he couldn't get into the water. And all of a sudden, Jesus stops by, and he says, man, he doesn't say, hey, I tell you what, I'm going to heal your body. He says, no, get up. Pick up your mat and walk. Let me explain that to you. Jesus stops by this man, and he does something impossible to prove that he can. And here's what he did. Not only did he say to get up, you're healed, but he said walk, which means what? He's going to put everything back together as quick as he brought it into the world, and he's going to tell the man to walk. But he was doing something far greater than what the first initial thought is. Now, if you dig a little bit deeper, Jesus was healing this man on the Sabbath. Now, in that particular day, that was one of those things that you just did not do. And all of the people were watching Jesus walk down, and he told the man two things. Number one, he's going to heal on the Sabbath, but then he's going to pick up his mat on the Sabbath, and they're going to try to get Jesus in this. And how many of you know people are still trying to catch Jesus in things and trying to say that he can't, and Jesus is like, oh, no, I can. You're just going to have to sit back and watch what happens. They begin to point at Jesus and point at this man, and Jesus is basically saying, look, y'all, you don't seem to understand who I am. Because if you understood who I was, you wouldn't ask me why I told him to pick up his mat and walk. There are too many people, and this is what Jesus was saying. Look, y'all have made all these rules and all these regulations on how to follow me, and instead of just following me, you're trying to follow the rules. Let me tell somebody this morning, it has never been about the rules that man has created to follow Jesus. It has always been about the relationship with him one-on-one. And somebody today needs to know he wants you in a relationship with him. Woo, Jesus stops by. I don't know about you, but if Jesus stopped by my mat, I'm going to trust him. But you know what? There was some trust that wasn't in this man, wasn't there? If you've been despised for 38 years, if you've been sick for 38 years, if you've been where people have walked over you for 38 years, you begin to where you trust no one. There's some of you in here that have gotten to where you don't trust people. And Jesus wasn't just trying to do this. He was trying to restore someone whose trust was broken. A man who was tired of trying. He was tired of trying to get into the water. He was tired of living. He had given up on all things. Jesus was going to do something for this man that he's trying to do for us today. He's saying, look, you may be tired. You may be tired of trying to get it right. You may have failed so many times, but here's what I've stopped by to tell you. I'm telling you to pick up your mat and walk. Jesus is telling someone this morning, stop worrying about what everybody else says about you and start putting your trust in something that is greater than your circumstance. Oh, let me tell someone this morning, Jesus is always greater than the circumstance. 38 years. And Jesus says, pick up your mat and walk. 38 years he was trying to be with the rules in the Jewish tradition. He was trying to follow all of them. By the way, they had made up over 600 different laws that they called rules in order to be a Christian and follow God. Aren't you glad that Jesus comes in and says, look, I don't need any of that. All you got to do is love me and love others. But he's trying to get them to get all the point to where we forget about what he was doing. And this man had lost trust in all people. Maybe some of you have lost trust in people. And Jesus asked him the question, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? Let me ask you this morning, if Jesus stopped by this morning in your pew, at your place in your house, in your bedroom to where you feel like you've been broken, and you're tired, and you're distracted, and you forgot about what it's all about, and he asked you the question, do you want to be well? Would you say, Jesus, that is kind of the weirdest statement you've ever said to me, and that's kind of pushing it? Or would you say, I want to be well? Notice Jesus was dealing with something a lot different than what the world thought at the moment, because when he said that, they had to think, oh, Jesus is going to tell this man he's well. But not only did he mess with him on the outward, but he was dealing with him on the inward. And that's what Jesus is doing for us today. He's not just trying to fix you on the outside, but he's trying to fix you on the inside. Oh, to someone this morning who's tired of trusting people, to someone this morning who's tired of just living the life that you're in, to someone this morning that doesn't know whether you can make it another day. Oh, Jesus is stopping by just to walk and ask you the question, do you want to be well? As I began to think about that, I began to wrap this up in a way that I hope we all can get. Jesus was inviting the man into a relationship with him and not pressing him for what he has not done. Let me just stop right there and say that again. There's a lot of us that if Jesus invited us in, we would try to look back and say, well, Jesus, you don't know what my past is like. Can I tell somebody this morning, it doesn't matter what your past is like. It only matters who holds your future. And Jesus is the one that holds your future. He's telling somebody today, don't worry about what happened yesterday. Trust me for your tomorrow. And as I began to think about Jesus asking all of these things, Jesus went to a place, and he came to a place to where he says, look, the world, the system is broken. The world we live in is still broken, folks. Most people, even in the church, can't get along with one another. We believe different things. We think that in order to get along with somebody, we have to believe all the same. But can I tell you, Jesus is still trying to fix a broken system. He's trying to deal with the issues. He's trying to get to the point to where he says, stop fighting with each other and start trusting in someone that is greater than the circumstance. It doesn't matter if you're tired. Just don't give up. Look, as a pastor, you have no idea the struggles daily that pastors go through in this kind of season. Because no matter how hard I want to do things perfectly for the church, there's always different views. In this room alone, I guarantee you there's about 5 different views on one matter. And it can get exhausting and tiring of trying to please everybody. Oh, but here's the thing. We are not supposed to please man, but we are supposed to please God, which means I can lay my head down at night and know that as long as I'm pleasing my Father, what the world thinks about me does not matter. Oh, I'm tired, folks. You're tired. Maybe you haven't heard the answer. Maybe you're waiting on Jesus to stop by. But can I tell you, he's on a one-way ticket down to see you. And he's going to stop by where you're at. And he's going to ask you the question, do you want to be made well?